Tin Ear by Spider Robinson. Originally published in the July 1977 issue of Cosmos Science Fiction and Fantasy magazine, republished in the number 7, 1981 issue of a fanzine called Paradox, and in two collections of the author's stories, Antinomy in 1980 and By Any Other Name in 2001. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. Tin Ear. Call them stargates, if you want to. The term was firmly engraved in the public's mind by science fiction writers with a weakness for grandiose jargon, fully 50 years before the first spatial anomaly was discovered and the war started. If you do call them stargates, you probably call us Stargate Keepers, or Keepers for short. But we call them holes for short, and we call ourselves wipers. It's all in how you look at it, of course. If we ever got to enter one, instead of just watching them and mopping up what comes out, we might have a different name for them. Or, if not, at least a different name for ourselves. And cheap ones, too, as the joke goes. But the enemy's drones keep popping out at irregular intervals, robot destroyer planetoids with simple but straightforward programs written somewhere on the far side of hyperspace. So, in addition to the heroes who get to go after the source and keep failing to return, somebody has to mount guard over every known hole to sound the alarm when a drone comes through, and hopefully to neutralize it before it neutralizes us. The war is still, after 20 years, at the stage where intact prizes are more valuable than confirmed kills. Data outworth debris and will for decades to come. For the enemy, apparently, as much as for us, or I wouldn't be here. The first enemy drone I ever saw could certainly have killed us both, if it had wanted to. It was well that Walter and I inhabited separate pods. We didn't get along at all. The only things we had in common were A, an abiding hatred for the government, which had drafted us into this silly-ass suicidal employ before we had a chance to volunteer like gentlemen, we always added, and B, a deep enjoyment of music. But all wipers share these two things. One of the few compensations our cramped and claustrophobic pods feature are their microtape libraries and excellent playback systems. You can't read properly on combat status. And so it was possible for Walter and me to spend endless hours within the same general volume of space, listening to separate masterpieces over our headphones and arguing only occasionally. Walter had no sense of humor whatsoever, despised anyone who did, loathed any music of satirical, parodying, or punning nature, and therefore was impossible to discuss music with, or anything much. But you can listen to a lot of good music if you have nothing else to do. I was 17 hours into Wagner's Ring des Nibelungen, thoroughly exhausted, but with the end in sight, when Walter's comm laser overrode my headphones. "George!" "What?" I yelled, but there was too much cacophony. We both had to kill our tapes. Damned if he didn't have Siegfried on himself, which annoyed me. I was certain, without asking, that he liked Wagner for all the wrong reasons. "Alert status," he said, yanking me from music back to reality. "Right." I slapped switches and reached out to touch my imitation rabbit's foot. So, the hole was puckering up, eh? A noble death might lie seconds away. With all possible speed, I joined Walter in training all the considerable firepower we possessed on the hole. And the bastard popped out a couple thousand miles to one side of the hole and bagged us both. Unheard of, still unexplained. Even Abacus Al, The computer you can count on was caught flat-footed. Tractor beam grabs me. Clang. Reels in fast. Clang. 500 million Rockies worth of Terran hardware on alien flypaper. Slump. Body goes limp in shock webbing. Ping. Lights go out. "George," Walter was saying in my headphones, "are you all right?" "I'll see," I replied, but by then some sort of anti-laser device must have been interposed by the drone planetoid which held us captive, for the headphones went dead. I sighed and checked my pod. It was on its gyrostabilized tail, upright. All my video screens were dead, except for the one that showed me about 20 degrees of starry space straight overhead. My location with reference to Walter was unknown. This was serious if I intended to live, which I did. But before I tried the radio, I inspected my weapons control systems. Dead in all directions except up. Main drive, alive but insufficient to pry me loose. And my body, alive and apparently unharmed. Then I heated up the radio on standard emergency band. "Down one freak, Cipher A," I said crisply and quickly, getting it all out before static jammed that frequency. Then I dialed her down to the next frequency on the standard list, instructed Abacus Al, the analogic, to convert to Cipher A before transmitting, "Walter?" "Here." Flat, mechanical voice. Al's rendition of human speech, just like what Walter was hearing from me. "Simpleton machine." "Yeah." "Capture, not kill. Programmed to immobilize us, disarm us, blind us, and prevent meaningful communication between us. As soon as it dopes out Cipher A, it'll..." 1,000,000 pounds of frying bacon drowned me out. I dropped Freak by the same interval again and shifted to Cipher B, allegedly a much tougher cipher to break. They call it the best non-perfect cipher possible. Walter was waiting on the new Freak. "It's essential," he began at once, "that we determine whether this drone planetoid is a Mark I or a Mark II. "Damn right," I agreed. "If we can work out our relative positions, we've at least got options." And a roar of static threw Cipher B out the window. Both types of enemy planetoid have only the two tractor beams, but the relative positions of them are one of the chief distinguishing features from the outside. If this was a Mark I, we could both throw full power to our drives, and while they wouldn't be sufficient to peel us loose, their energies should cross, like surgical paired lasers, at the center of the planetoid, burning out its volitional hardware. If this were Mark II, the same maneuver would have our drives cross in the heart of the power plant and distribute the component atoms of all three of us across an enormous spherical volume of space. But how could we compute our positions blind, on a sphere with no agreed-upon poles or meridians anyhow, and communicate them to each other's computers without tripping the damned planetoid's squelch program? The cagey son of a bitch had cracked Cipher B too easily. Apparently it was programmed to jam anything that it computed to be exchange of meaningful information, whether it could decipher it or not. That suggested that Cipher C, the perfect cipher, might be the only answer. The perfect cipher, really a code cipher, was devised way back in the 1900s and has never been improved upon. You have a computer generate an enormous run of random numbers in duplicate. You give a copy of the printout to each communicator, and down the column of random numbers they go, each writing out the alphabet, one letter to each number, over and over again. For each successive letter they want to encipher and send, they jump down to the next alphabet group in line, select the random number adjacent to the desired letter, and transmit that number. A savvy analogic deduces pauses, activates voter. Communication. The cipher cannot be broken by anyone not in possession of an identical list of random numbers, for it produces utterly no pattern. We had a code, by the way, a true code, in which prearranged four-letter groups stood for various prearranged phrases. But not a phrase on the list applied to our situation. I love the Army, and using a series of exclusively four-letter groups would have tipped off the alien computer that a code was in use. But Cipher C had one flaw that I could see, and so I hesitated before dialing the frequency again. If we lost this chance, we were effectively deaf and dumb as well as blind. Oh, God, I prayed. Give Walter just this once, and for no more than 15 minutes, at least half a brain. I dialed the new freak. "Got to take star sights," he was saying. "It's the only way to..." "Shut up." "Eh?" "No sound. Listen. Heed. Okay? Carefully. Yes, sights, but do not under any circumstances repeat any phrase or word group I use. Comprende?" I breathed a silent prayer. "Why shouldn't I repeat any phrase or word group you use?" Walter asked, puzzlement plain even through voter. "God damn it!" I roared, but I was addressing only another roar of static. Groups with identical numbers of characters in repeated sequence were the only clue the enemy computer had needed. It was meaningful communication, so it was jammed. One more standard band left on the list. If we had to hunt for each other on offbeat frequencies, it could take forever to establish contact. I scratched a telemetry contact and consulted Abacus Al. "How," I programmed, "can I communicate meaningful information without communicating meaningful information?" That's the kind of question that makes most computers self-destruct, like an audio amplifier with no output connected. But Al is built to return whimsy with whimsy, and his sense of humor is as subtle as my own. "Write a poem," he replied, "or sing a song." I snorted. "No good." I punched. "Can't use words." "Hum," Al printed. A nova went off in my skull. I cross-wired the microtape library in Al's belly to the radio in his rump and had him activate the last standard frequency. It was live, but silent. Walter had finally figured out his previous stupidity. He waited for me to come up with inspiration this time. I keyed the opening bars of an ancient Beatles song. "We can work it out." In clear, and then killed it before the melody repeated. A long silence, while Walter slowly worked it out in his thick head. "Come on, dummy," I yelled in my head. "Give me something to work with." And my headphones filled with the strains of the most poignant song from Cabaret. Maybe this time. Thank God. I keyed Al's star chart displays and thought hard. The chunk of sky I saw was useless unless I could learn what Walter was seeing over his own head. The two combined would give us a fix. I couldn't see the whole, and I had to assume he couldn't either, or he'd have surely mentioned it already. Or would he? Anyone with half a brain would have. I keyed in the early 21st century revivalist dirge, "Is there a hole in your bucket?" and hoped he wouldn't think I was requesting a damage report. He responded with the late 21st century anti-revivalist ballad, "The Sky Ain't Holy No More." Okay then, back to the Beatles. "Tell me what you see." Walter paused a long time and at last gave up and sent the intro to Don McLean's Van Gogh song, the line that goes, "Starry, starry night." He was plainly stymied. I'd have to think for both of us. Inspiration came. I punched for a late 21st century drugging song called "Brother, Have You Got Any Reds?" There were few prominent red stars in this galactic neighborhood. If any appeared in Walter's window, it might help Al figure our positions. His uptake was improving. The answer was immediate. Ellington's immortal, "I ain't got nothing but the blues." So much for that one. I was stumped. I could think of no more leading questions to ask Walter with music. If he couldn't, for once, make his own mind start working in punny ways, we were both sunk. Any time now, real live enemies might pop out of the hole, and there was no way of telling what they were like because no human had ever survived a meeting with them at that time. Come on, Walter. And he floored me. The piece he selected almost eluded me, so obscure was it. An incredibly ancient children's jingle called "The Bear Went Over the Mountain." I studied the star charts feverishly, trying to visualize the geometry. Cosmometry? I lacked enough skill to have Al do it for me. If Walter could see the bear at all, it seemed to me... I sent the chorus of smack dab in the middle, the legendary Charles's version, and hoped Walter could sense the question mark. Again, his answer baffled me momentarily. Another Beatles song. "He loves me," I thought wildly, and then I got it. "Yeah, yeah, yeah." My fingers tickled Abacus Al's keys. A ruby light blinked agreement, and Al's tactical assessment appeared on the display. Mark 1. It read. "Walter!" I yelled in clear. "Main drive, now!" And so when the live enemies came through the hole, we had the drop on them, which is how man got his first alien corpses to study, which is why we're, according to the government, winning the war these days. But the part of the whole episode that I remember best is when we were waiting there, dead in space, in ambush, our remaining weaponry aimed at the hole, and Walter was saying dazedly, "The most amazing thing is that the damn thing just sat there listening to us plot its destruction, with no more sense of self-preservation than the foresight of its programmers allowed. It just sat there." He giggled. At least from anyone else, I'd have called that sound a giggle. "Sat there the whole time." He was definitely giggling now, and it must be racial instinct because he was doing it right. The whole time, just... He lost control and began laughing out loud. "Just taking notes," he whooped, and I dissolved into shuddering laughter myself. Our mutual need for catharsis transformed his modest stinker into the grandest pun ever made, and we roared. Even Abacus Al blinked a few times. "Walter," I said, "I've got a feeling the rest of this hitch is going to be okay." And then alarms were going off, and we went smoothly into action as a unit, and the enemy never had a chance. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.